I'm a 30-year-old guy, single and living in a modest one-bedroom apartment. My life is pretty straightforward. I work full-time in it, I'm good at my job, and while I'm not swimming in cash, I manage to cover my bills and even put a little aside for emergencies. My social life isn't wild, but I've got a small circle of close friends who keep me sane. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and I've worked hard to keep it stable. My older brother Adam is 35 and has 3 kids, 10, 7, and 4. His life, on the other hand, is a constant whirlwind. He's been in and out of family court ever since he and his ex-wife split 2 years ago. They fight about everything: custody schedules, child support, school decisions, you name it. I've mostly kept my distance from their drama, aside from a few polite family gatherings where I nod along and keep my opinions to myself. It all started with a phone call from my mom. I had just sat down after a long day at work, reheating leftovers for dinner, when she called out of the blue. That wasn't unusual. My mom loves to call and check in. This time, though, she wasn't interested in small talk. She got straight to the point. Adam's ex-wife was pushing for full custody, claiming that his home environment wasn't stable enough for the kids. Mom had decided that the best solution was for me to take in Adam's kids temporarily. Just for a few months, she said, until things settled down. I froze. 3 kids? In my tiny apartment? I couldn't even picture where they would all sleep, let alone how I'd manage daycare pickups, school runs, and everything else that comes with taking care of children. Mom didn't seem to notice my silence. She kept talking about how it was family duty and how the kids needed a safe and stable place to stay. She threw in phrases like, "You're the responsible one, and they can't end up with strangers." I asked for some time to think about it. That was the best I could manage without outright refusing. Mom sounded relieved, like she'd already decided I was going to say yes. As soon as I hung up, I grabbed my laptop and started crunching numbers. My rent alone took a big chunk of my paycheck, and groceries, utilities, and other bills didn't leave much wiggle room. Adding 3 kids into the mix? It wasn't just tight, it was impossible. Even if I skipped eating out, canceled my streaming subscriptions, and stopped saving altogether, I'd still fall short. I texted my best friend to vent. We met for coffee the next day, and she listened while I laid it all out: the financial strain, the lack of space, the complete upheaval of my life. She didn't sugarcoat it. "This isn't just babysitting for a weekend," she said. "It's your entire life being turned upside down." Meanwhile, Mom wasn't giving me much space to think. She called the next day, guilt-tripping me about how much the kids were struggling and how no one else in the family could step up. She kept repeating that it was temporary, but when I asked her what temporary meant, she got vague. A few months? 6? A year? She didn't have a clear answer. I decided to talk to Dad, hoping for a more level-headed perspective. He's divorced from Mom and tends to stay out of the family drama, but this time, he was on my side. He agreed that Adam needed to figure this out himself and told me not to let Mom guilt me into something that would ruin my stability. Before I could even process all of this, Adam decided to make his own move. One Saturday, he showed up at my place with all 3 kids in tow. I didn't even know they were coming. He acted like it was a casual visit, but within an hour, he'd disappeared, leaving me alone with them. He came back 3 hours later, smiling like it was no big deal. That visit was chaos. My apartment wasn't set up for kids. They were bored, fighting over who got to use my tablet, and the youngest spilled juice all over my couch. By the time Adam came back, I was exhausted. He brushed off my frustration, saying he thought spending time with the kids would help me bond with them and see how manageable it could be. That was my breaking point. I told him and Mom in no uncertain terms that I couldn't commit to taking the kids. I needed space to figure out what I could realistically do to help without derailing my entire life. Mom didn't take it well. She called me selfish, saying I was putting myself before innocent kids who need help. Adam looked hurt but didn't argue. I could see in his face that he still expected me to come around eventually. That night, I opened Reddit and started drafting a post. I wasn't sure if I'd actually hit submit, but I needed to get it out. I wanted to know if I was being unreasonable or if standing my ground was the right thing to do. As I typed, I realized just how tangled this situation had become. Update 1. Date. After making it clear to my mom and Adam that I couldn't take the kids, the fallout started almost immediately. Mom called me the next morning, her voice sharp and accusing. She went on and on about how I was abandoning my family and failing to step up when it mattered most. She didn't stop there. She began telling me how my refusal was going to destroy the kids' lives and that I was being selfish for thinking only about myself. That same day, Adam started blowing up my phone with text messages. He told me how hard things were for him, how he was trying his best, and how he never thought I'd leave him to handle this on his own. Each text felt more desperate than the last. He even said he couldn't believe how cold I was being, and that the kids would grow up thinking I didn't care about them. Feeling overwhelmed, I finally hit post on my Reddit draft. I explained the situation, how I was being pressured, and how I felt stuck between doing what my family wanted and protecting my own stability. The post gained traction fast. By the next morning, it had hundreds of comments. Most people seemed to agree that I was in an impossible situation. Some pointed out that taking the kids in would only enable Adam's irresponsibility. Others sympathized with the kids, but agreed that I wasn't in a position to take them on. A few comments were harsh, calling me heartless for not stepping up, but they were in the minority. I decided to follow up with a budget breakdown and an update. I laid out my expenses and what it would cost to care for 3 kids. Even with every cost-cutting measure I could think of, no dining out, no extras, no savings, it still didn't add up. The responses to that post were supportive, with many people telling me I was being realistic and responsible. To my surprise, an aunt from my dad's side reached out after seeing the post. She hadn't been close to us growing up, but she told me she supported my decision. She also admitted that she wasn't shocked at Adam's behavior. According to her, Adam had always relied on others to clean up his messes. She even offered to talk to Mom on my behalf, though I wasn't sure how much that would help. A few days later, Adam brought the kids over again. This time, he called ahead but didn't ask, He just told me he was coming. I felt cornered and didn't want to argue in front of the kids, so I let it happen. The visit wasn't as chaotic as the first one. The kids seemed to enjoy themselves, but it was clear they didn't fully understand what was going on. The oldest, a 10-year-old girl, asked me if she and her siblings were going to stay with me forever. It was a gut punch. I told her I wasn't sure yet and changed the subject. Mom wasn't content with just badgering me directly. She started telling extended family members that I was refusing to help, painting me as the villain. My phone lit up with calls and texts from cousins and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know what was going on. Some were supportive, but others tried to guilt-trip me into changing my mind. One cousin even told me I should just do it for a little while because family comes first. At work, my focus started slipping. My boss noticed and asked if everything was okay. I didn't go into details, but I told her I was dealing with family issues. She seemed understanding but reminded me to keep my priorities in order. It was a wake-up call. I couldn't let this drama mess up my job too. Adam's next move was to offer to pay me back once he got back on his feet. The problem? Adam history of financial irresponsibility. He'd borrowed money from me before and never repaid it. I wasn't about to bet my future on his promises. Back on Reddit, the comments on my post took an interesting turn. Some users started digging into Adam's history and pointed out patterns of neglect. They weren't wrong. Adam's ex-wife had been the one holding everything together before the divorce. When she left, it became clear how little Adam had been doing to manage the kids or his life in general. One commenter suggested I consult a lawyer to understand what responsibilities I'd be taking on if I agreed to house the kids temporarily. That advice stuck with me. I scheduled a consultation, and the lawyer explained that even a temporary arrangement could create a legal precedent, making it harder for me to step away later. That sealed it. I couldn't take the risk. The next time I spoke to Mom, she dropped a bombshell. If I didn't step up, she would cut ties with me entirely. She said she couldn't believe I was willing to abandon the family like this. I told her I was sorry she felt that way, but I couldn't do what she was asking. Thankfully, my friends and coworkers rallied around me. My best friend even offered to let me crash at her place if I needed a break from the constant family pressure. It was a relief to know I had people in my corner. I decided to meet Adam one-on-one to lay out my concerns. I explained the financial and logistical issues and reminded him that I wasn't the kid's parent. He listened, but in the end, he brushed it all off as excuses. He said I was making this harder than it needed to be. That conversation was the turning point. I realized I couldn't keep trying to convince my family to see reason. I had to stand my ground, even if it meant more fallout. Update 2. Not long after I stood my ground with Adam and Mom, the family drama started spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just my immediate family anymore. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who hadn't spoken to me in years, were suddenly invested in my decision. My phone was constantly lighting up with messages, some offering support and others guilt-tripping me for not being there when it mattered. One cousin even called to tell me I was letting the family down. A few days later, Adam's ex-wife reached out to me directly. I didn't know her well. Our interactions were limited to a few polite exchanges at family events before the divorce. She got straight to the point, explaining why she was pushing for full custody. According to her, Adam's house was in complete disarray. He wasn't keeping up with the kids' routines, their schoolwork was slipping, and the youngest had missed multiple doctor's appointments. She even mentioned that Adam had left the kids with neighbors overnight on more than one occasion when he needed a break. Hearing this made everything click. Adam wasn't just struggling, he was neglecting the basics. His ex-wife didn't want full custody out of spite, she was trying to protect the kids. The next escalation came from Mom, who decided to take matters into her own hands. One Saturday morning, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, the kids were standing there with overnight bags. Mom smiled like this was some kind of surprise party and said it would just be for the weekend. I didn't even get a chance to respond before the oldest, the 10-year-old, started begging to stay. The younger two quickly joined in, crying and clinging to my legs. It was chaos. Mom looked at me expectantly, clearly hoping I'd cave under the pressure. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just shut the door in their faces, but I also couldn't take them in. After several tense minutes, I convinced Mom to take the kids back, but not before she muttered something about me having no heart. That evening, I found out a cousin had posted about the situation on social media. The post was vague but clearly about me. It talked about how some people in the family were refusing to help in a time of need and letting innocent kids suffer. The comments were a mix of sympathy and criticism, and a few people even tagged me in the thread. I ignored it, but it left a bad taste in my mouth. During my next call with the lawyer, I brought up Mom's attempt to leave the kids with me. The lawyer warned me again about the potential legal risks. Even a weekend could set a precedent, making it harder for me to refuse in the future. That advice solidified my decision. No matter how hard it got, I couldn't take the kids in, not even temporarily. Back on Reddit, a user messaged me privately, offering to help connect me with local resources for Adam and his kids. They provided links to organizations that could offer support, like parenting classes and temporary housing assistance. I passed the information on to Adam, but whether he'd actually use it was another story. In a surprising twist, my dad stepped in. He had mostly stayed out of the drama, but after hearing about Mom's stunt, he called me and said he'd take the kids temporarily if it would relieve some of the pressure. I was relieved but also skeptical. Dad's a good guy, but he's not in the best health, and taking on 3 young kids would be a lot for him. Still, it was a better option than me. Adam didn't take any of this well. He called me later that night, furious. He accused me of being selfish, tearing the family apart, and even said I was the reason his custody battle was going south. His words were harsh, but they didn't change my mind. I knew this wasn't about me, it was about his choices catching up with him. Mom's tactics shifted again. Instead of pushing me to take the kids, she started asking for money. If I wouldn't take them in, she argued I could at least contribute financially to help Adam out. I refused. My budget was already tight, and I wasn't about to throw money at a problem that wasn't mine to solve. Through all this, I learned from the kids' school that they were struggling academically. The instability at home was affecting their grades and behavior. It broke my heart to hear, but it also made me more certain that I wasn't equipped to give them the stability they needed. The updates I posted on Reddit kept gaining traction. More people chimed in with stories about family obligations, boundaries, and the pressure to step up. Some users suggested I testify on behalf of Adam's ex-wife to ensure the kids ended up in a stable environment. It was something I hadn't considered, but it made sense. Then, out of nowhere, Adam's ex-wife offered a solution. She was willing to take the kids full-time if she got financial support from Adam or Mom. It wasn't ideal, but it was the most realistic option anyone had proposed so far. By the end of the week, I made my decision. I told my family I wouldn't take the kids but would continue to help in other ways, like finding resources and offering emotional support. Predictably, Mom and Adam weren't happy, but I didn't care anymore. I knew it was the right choice, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like there might be a resolution in sight. Update 3. After I told my family I wouldn't be taking in Adam's kids, the reaction was immediate. And then it wasn't. Mom, who had been relentless in her guilt trips and emotional manipulation, suddenly went radio silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was so out of character that I kept checking my phone, half expecting a barrage of new accusations. But the silence continued, and for a while it was almost more unsettling than her constant pushing. Adam, however, picked up where Mom left off. His messages became angrier, more desperate. He blamed me for making his custody battle worse, claiming my refusal was proof to the court that his family wasn't supportive. He even suggested that if the kids ended up in foster care, it would be on my conscience. The texts kept coming, one after the other, until I finally muted his number just to get some peace. My best friend, who had been following all of this, staged what she called a reality check intervention. She invited me over for coffee and spent the next hour reminding me why my boundaries mattered. She didn't mince words. I wasn't responsible for Adam's choices, and taking on more than I could handle wouldn't solve anything. It was the kind of blunt, no-nonsense talk I needed, and it helped more than I expected. Around this time, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Adam's kids had been temporarily placed with a relative on his ex-wife's side. Apparently, it was a chaotic situation. The relative already had a full house and wasn't equipped to handle 3 more kids. The thought of the kids bouncing from one unstable environment to another weighed on me, but I knew I still couldn't offer what they needed. Then Dad stepped in. He had been relatively quiet up until now, but he'd had enough. He called a family meeting, not the kind where everyone gathers around a table, but a series of blunt conversations with Mom and Adam. I heard about it later from him directly. He told them to stop harassing me and focus on figuring out their own solutions. He even offered to take the kids himself temporarily, despite his health and limited resources, just to take the pressure off me. It was a relief to know someone else was on my side, even if the situation was far from ideal. Back on Reddit, I posted another update. That one gained even more traction than the first. Hundreds of people shared their own stories about family drama and being pressured to take on responsibilities that weren't theirs. The support was overwhelming, but what really stood out were the practical suggestions. One commenter connected me with a local nonprofit that specialized in helping families in crisis. They offered resources like parenting classes, housing assistance, and even legal aid. I passed the information along to Adam, though I doubted he'd use it. After a week of silence, Mom finally broke it with a tearful phone call. She accused me of abandoning the family and letting the kids suffer. Her voice cracked as she talked about how much the kids missed me and how I was their only hope. She wasn't yelling this time, she was pleading. I stayed firm but tried to be empathetic. I told her I loved the kids and wanted to help, but I couldn't do it in the way she wanted. It wasn't what she wanted to hear, and the call ended awkwardly. Not long after that, I started hearing rumors. Adam had been telling extended family members that I was rolling in money and simply refusing to help out of spite. I don't know where he got the idea. I'm comfortable, but I'm not exactly living large. The rumors added fuel to the fire, and the family divide deepened. Some relatives reached out to support me, saying they understood my position. Others criticized me for not being there when it mattered. Then Adam pulled another stunt. One Friday evening, he dropped the kids off at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find them standing there with overnight bags, looking confused. Adam had already driven off by the time I realized what was happening. With no other options, I let them stay for the weekend. It was exhausting. They were sweet kids, but the lack of space and structure made it clear that this wasn't sustainable. When Adam came back to pick them up, he acted like he'd done me a favor by letting me spend quality time with them. I brought this up with my lawyer during our next call. She reiterated what she'd said before. Taking the kids in, even for a short time, could set a legal precedent. If the court saw me as a consistent caregiver, it would be harder to step back later. That reminder reinforced my decision. The stress was starting to take a toll. My work performance dipped, and I found myself snapping at coworkers over minor things. Recognizing I needed help, I started seeing a therapist. The sessions helped me untangle the guilt and pressure I'd been carrying. The therapist pointed out that saying no wasn't just okay, it was necessary for my own well-being. With her guidance, I set firmer boundaries. I let my family know that I wouldn't entertain any more unannounced visits or manipulative tactics. If they wanted to discuss solutions, I was open to that, but I wasn't going to be their scapegoat anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally taking control of the situation. Update 4. Not long after I set firmer boundaries, Adam's ex-wife reached out again. This time, she was upfront about why. She was officially filing for sole custody of the kids and needed my help. She asked if I'd be willing to testify in court, not to attack Adam, but to provide an honest account of what I'd witnessed. She also asked if I had any resources or information that could help strengthen her case. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. My priority was the kids' welfare, and if my testimony could help ensure they ended up in a stable environment, it was worth it. I wasn't doing this for Adam or his ex-wife, I was doing it for them. When word got back to Mom, the fallout was immediate. She called to repeat her earlier ultimatum, declaring she'd cut ties with me if I helped Adam's ex-wife. This time, I didn't flinch. I told her she could do what she felt was best, but I wasn't changing my decision. For once, I wasn't bluffing, and I think she knew it. Meanwhile, the updates on Reddit were still gaining traction. In one of the threads, a lawyer chimed in, offering free advice to Adam's ex-wife. They outlined steps she could take to strengthen her case and emphasized the importance of creating a detailed record of Adam's behavior. I passed this information along to her, and she was grateful for the support. It felt surreal that an online community was doing more to help her than Adam or Mom had done. In an unexpected twist, a cousin who had initially been critical of me reached out. They apologized for their earlier judgment and admitted they hadn't fully understood the situation. They even offered to step in and help Adam's kids directly, whether through financial support or occasional babysitting. It was a small gesture, but it gave me hope that not everyone in the family was blind to reality. Around this time, Dad shared something that put Adam's financial struggles into perspective. For years, Adam had been living beyond his means, overspending, maxing out credit cards, and ignoring basic budgeting principles. Dad had tried to warn him, but Adam always shrugged it off. It explained a lot about why he was in such a mess now. The kids were eventually placed in a temporary foster care-like program while the custody case moved forward. This was a relief for me, though it devastated Mom. She called me crying and blamed me for not stepping up. I reminded her that this arrangement was safer for the kids than being shuffled between unstable homes. She didn't argue, but the conversation ended on a sour note. The placement seemed to be a turning point for Adam, though. He called me late one night, clearly overwhelmed, and admitted he had no idea how to parent effectively or get his life together. It was the first time he'd shown real vulnerability. I told him he needed to start taking steps, real, tangible ones, to improve. I offered to help him find parenting classes and therapy resources, but made it clear that was the extent of my involvement. In therapy, I started unpacking why this whole situation had affected me so deeply. My therapist helped me realize that I'd spent much of my life being the fixer in the family. Anytime there was a problem, I was the one expected to step in. This wasn't just about Adam and the kids, it was about years of being conditioned to put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. Despite all the chaos, a small silver lining appeared. I received a promotion at work. It wasn't a huge leap, but the recognition and pay increase were a welcome boost. For the first time in weeks, something was going right. Mom, perhaps sensing that her usual tactics weren't working, shifted to a softer approach. She asked if I could contribute financially instead of taking the kids in. I declined again, explaining that throwing money at the problem wouldn't solve it. Instead, I offered practical advice, like how to apply for assistance programs and connect Adam with local resources. She wasn't thrilled, but at least she didn't push further. To my surprise, Adam actually started making changes. He enrolled in a parenting class and began attending therapy, albeit reluctantly. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. For once, it felt like he was taking responsibility instead of deflecting it onto me. The custody hearing was the most nerve-wracking part of this whole ordeal. When it was my turn to testify, I stuck to the facts. I shared what I'd observed about the kids' needs and the challenges Adam was facing, without turning it into an attack. The judge seemed to appreciate the honesty, and by the end of the hearing, I felt like I'd done my part. The decision came a week later. Adam's ex-wife was granted temporary sole custody, with Adam allowed supervised visits. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it gave the kids the stability they desperately needed. Knowing they were in a safer environment lifted a weight off my shoulders. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Adam still had a long way to go, but the steps he was taking showed promise. Mom was still distant, but I'd made peace with the fact that our relationship might never fully recover. What mattered most was that the kids were safe, and I could finally start focusing on rebuilding my own life. Update 5. The custody battle finally came to a close a few weeks after my testimony. The court awarded Adam's ex-wife full custody of the kids, with Adam granted supervised visitation rights. The arrangement wasn't permanent. Adam would have the chance to petition for more access if he showed significant progress in his parenting and stability. For now, the decision felt like the best possible outcome. The kids would have a stable home, and Adam would have a clear path forward if he chose to take it. Not long after the decision, I started hearing updates about the kids through mutual contacts. They were adjusting well to their new routine, thriving in school, and seemed happier overall. Their teachers noted improvements in their behavior and performance, and even the youngest, who had struggled the most, was showing signs of settling into the new environment. Knowing they were finally getting the care and structure they needed lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. Mom, however, didn't take the court's decision well. She became quieter, less confrontational, and started pulling away emotionally. She didn't call as often, and when she did, it was mostly surface-level conversation. There were no more guilt trips or accusations, but the strain in our relationship was clear. I got the sense that she was disappointed in me but had run out of ways to express it. At the same time, it was a relief to have the constant pressure lifted. Surprisingly, Adam also started making changes. He got a new job, nothing flashy, but it paid better and offered more stability. He stuck with the parenting classes and therapy sessions, and from what I heard, he was making a genuine effort to improve. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but for the first time, he seemed to be taking responsibility for his actions. Even his ex-wife acknowledged that he was showing progress, which was something I never thought I'd hear. The ripple effect of the custody outcome extended to the rest of the family. Relatives who had been critical of me during the ordeal started reaching out to apologize. Some admitted they hadn't fully understood the situation and had been too quick to judge. A few even said they respected me for standing my ground, especially after seeing how things played out. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was nice to know that at least some people had come around. In therapy, I started to reflect on everything that had happened. My therapist helped me see that saying no wasn't an act of selfishness. It was an act of self-preservation. For years, I had been the family's go-to fixer, the one who was expected to step in whenever there was a crisis. This time, I had drawn a line, and while it had been incredibly difficult, it had also been freeing. I realized that I didn't have to carry everyone else's burdens, especially at the expense of my own well-being. With the family drama behind me, I finally had the mental space to focus on my own goals. I revisited a dream I'd put on hold for years, saving for a future home. Now that I wasn't constantly worried about unexpected expenses or being roped into a situation I couldn't afford, I could start setting aside money again. It felt good to have something to look forward to, something that was just for me. My friends, who had supported me throughout the ordeal, became an even stronger part of my life. They had been there through every twist and turn, offering advice, a listening ear, or just a distraction when I needed it. If anything, this experience had shown me who I could truly rely on, and I made a point to nurture those relationships moving forward. On Reddit, my thread continued to gain traction. By the end of the year, it had become one of the top posts in its category, sparking broader discussions about family dynamics, boundaries, and the pressure to take on responsibilities that aren't yours. People from all over shared their own stories, and it felt surreal to see how many others had faced similar challenges. The overwhelming support from strangers helped me realize I wasn't alone in this. Out of the blue, I received a message from Adam's ex-wife. She thanked me for supporting the custody decision and for testifying in court. She promised to keep me updated on the kids' well-being and said that they were adjusting well to their new life. It was a kind gesture, and it reinforced that, despite everything, my actions had made a positive impact. Even Adam reached out. In a rare moment of humility, he thanked me for forcing him to take responsibility. He admitted that I'd made the right call, even though he hadn't seen it at the time. It was an unexpected but welcome moment of closure. As the holidays approached, the family dynamic shifted. For the first time in years, there was less tension. We had a quieter, more harmonious holiday season, with everyone respecting clear boundaries. Mom still seemed distant, but she didn't bring up the custody situation again. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. Looking ahead, I feel more at peace than I've felt in years. This experience tested me in ways I didn't expect, but it also taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and the importance of standing firm in your decisions. I'm grateful for the growth it brought, even if the journey wasn't easy. For the first time in a long time, I'm optimistic about the future.